Well, tattoos used to be taboo. Now they are becoming more popular than ever, and that's raising concerns for some doctors. About 1 in 3 U.S. adults have at least one tattoo, and those who are tatted once are likely to get even more. But now a new study is raising concerns about what is in the ink being permanently injected onto and into people's bodies. Researchers conducted an analysis of 54 U.S. manufactured tattoo inks and found that 90% of them had major inconsistencies with the ingredients listed on the label. And the actual ingredients have been linked to illnesses, some of them very serious. As of right now, the FDA has yet to regulate tattoo ink, although it is expected to happen soon. So here to talk with us a little bit more about this study, Binghamton chemistry professor John Swierk. Professor, thank you so much for being with us. You know this study well. You are a senior researcher in all of this. What is your biggest takeaway from this study?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that we have is that ink manufacturing needs to really modernize. They really need to get their act together. There are serious deficiencies in terms of how these inks are being made. Either things are being added intentionally or they're not being careful with where they're getting materials from, and so unlisted ingredients are getting into the inks. Whatever it is, the manufacturers really need to change.
And did this study look at the different pigments maybe individually? And are some colors potentially more problematic than others, or was it kind of a whole, let's look at all of them?
So we focused on the whole ink, so the pigments and the carrier package that the pigment would be suspended in. And so we were able to identify the pigments. Some of the inks, the pigments that were listed were correct. Some of the inks, the pigments were incorrect. And then we found a lot of unlisted additives in the carrier package. All of this would be inserted into the skin along with the tattoo ink, though, when you get a tattoo, which is why there is some cause for concern.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, 90% having major inconsistencies, Professor. Is it known why the contents of the actual tattoo ink many times is not matching what's on the product label?
You know, it's impossible to say whether this is just bad manufacturing practices or an intentional addition of some of these things to try to improve the properties of the inks. We just don't know. And because there's really hasn't been much oversight on tattoo inks, and many of these companies don't really follow sort of modern, appropriate manufacturing practices, it's really hard to say where the breakdown is.
Yeah, but it is such a major breakdown here. Okay, so you're a senior researcher, you're a chemistry professor. What do you think the FDA will do or should do with these study results?
So in the very end of 2022, right, Congress passed a law that updated cosmetics regulations and for the first time obligated the FDA to really regulate and look at tattoo inks. And part of that is accurate labeling and good manufacturing practices, adverse event reporting, things like that. That hasn't really been implemented in full yet. And so what we're hoping is that this study is going to help inform this discussion, right? That it's really going to highlight that this is something that's urgently needed and that the FDA and manufacturers need to get together and figure out how to address this problem as soon as possible. Whether that is, you know, self-certification or more regular testing of inks by the FDA or outside vendors, I don't know, but something needs to change.
Yeah, you know, and tattoos are so popular, especially with young people, but really for so many people, regardless of age. Based on what you've learned, what is your advice for those thinking about getting one?
So our advice is still the same, right? My team isn't anti-tattoo. Our focus is on transparency. And we think that if you're going to get a tattoo, you should be able to go into it with eyes open, knowing exactly what you're putting in your skin. And we think manufacturers have an ethical and legal obligation to do that, right? We know that there can be problems with tattoos if you go to an unskilled artist who's not using good sanitation, and you're not following proper aftercare. So our message, if somebody's concerned about a tattoo, is go work with an artist that is a trained professional that's following best practices for sanitation, follow their advice. And if you have a concern beyond that, then, you know, maybe consider waiting till the research comes in a little more. But we know that that's where there can be issues. And with everything else, we're trying to get the research there to understand if there are things that people need to be concerned about.
Yeah, and it's good to at least be aware.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.